A vague disclaimer is no one's friend. This podcast will look at episodes in relation to Buffy and Angel as a whole, and therefore contains spoilers for the entirety of both series. If you haven't seen all of Buffy the Vampire Slayer and Angel the series, go and watch them before you listen to this. Remember, you've been warned.
The hardest thing in this world is to live in it.
That's why there's us, champions. We live as though the world were as it should be, to show it what it can be.
The Earth is definitely doomed.
It's Tuesday, so it must be time to return to the Hellmouth. We're going through the Buffyverse episode by episode and a look back at Joss Whedon's iconic shows. I'm Emcee, and I'm here with...
Hey, it's Andie.
This is David.
Hi, it's Jan.
And I'm Logan.
So today we're talking about episode 15 of season 2, Phases. It was written by Rob Deshotel and Dean Patali and directed by Bruce Seth Green, and it originally aired January 27th, 1998. So this episode, I have such conflicted feelings about this episode because I love it and hate it in the same breath.
I feel the same way.
Same.
Conflicting feelings. I mean, because, you get a really solid Oz story. It's awesome.
Yes.
That's saving grace. And then it's just rife with homophobia and sexism. It's awesome.
Mm-hmm. But
Yeah.
I mean, we start off with this first scene, which is one of the reasons why this episode is so good, because we start out with Oz looking at the statue of
Amy's mom.
Amy's mom. Yeah, I can't remember what her first name is.
Catherine.
Catherine. Yes, Catherine Madison.
It's like the best callback ever.
It is really good.
It
Yeah.
really is. Is she buried in the Hellmouth now? Is that giant hole?
In the episode Doomed, there was going to be a reference to her. In the original script, when they first go down into the Hellmouth, because they go down into, the wreckage of the school,
Right.
they were, the original establishing shot was supposed to, pan up from this wrecked statue of Catherine Madison, but they cut it out. And I'm like, why did you cut it
that's a
out?
shame.
That's great. That's a good callback.
Yeah. Correct me if I'm wrong, but nobody actually knows she's trapped in that trophy.
No
do
one
they?
knows.
No.
Nope, they don't.
Dark. Really, really dark.
Really dark.
Extremely
Yeah.
dark.
Yeah. But it was a wonderful reference, and I did not see that coming the first time I watched this. I was like, oh my god!
Oh, I know. I love that. I was like, oh man, that's great. Yeah.
The first time I saw it, I hadn't seen season 1 because, I started watching the show while it was airing in the midst of this season, and I was like, okay. And then when I rewatched the series, I was like, oh my god, yeah.
Well, I mean, the thing is, if you don't know the reference, you just think Oz is kind of a weird guy, which he is. So
Yeah, I
I
was
mean,
going to say, yeah, he is.
Yeah, it's
I love him so much.
Well, that's like a lot of times when they throw references in on Doctor Who. I love that. If you don't know the reference, it will not matter to you.
Right.
But if
Yeah.
you do, you'll be really happy to see the reference.
Yes.
Yeah.
Adult jokes in children's movies. It's like,
Yeah.
this isn't for the
Yes.
kids.
Yeah. No, I mean, that's the sign of a really good reference. If it's entertaining without knowing what it is, but then if you do know, it's just like, oh my god.
Yeah, it's not a this is an inside joke that you don't get if you're not a real fan. It was very subtly done.
Yes.
And now I feel like we should insert the meme of, Steve Rogers. I get that reference. So.
And we get Oz and Willow being so cute and awkward together.
Oh. There's going to be a lot of sighing, I think, in this episode.
Yes, well, because they're like the perfect, adorable TV couple at this point. So,
Well,
yeah.
I mean, looking at all of the relationships over Buffy and Angel, they really have the healthiest and most normal relationship.
They do.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And I mean, I think this even applies to some of the later couples. Even Willow and Tara, their relationship doesn't have the same grounded evolution that this one does. And I think that a
Not
lot
at
of
all. Yeah.
that comes from them playing so coy for so long with what they were doing. But this one, you see them, they go out on dates and it's all, you know, it's normal teen stuff. And it's like, oh, you know, when are we going to kiss? And it's cute and normal. And yeah.
Well, I think that's what we were talking about last week too. There's the fact that this is a relationship that sort of starts at zero and builds slowly and nicely. It's a very organic relationship. So it's not just like, oh, they look at each other and they fall in love and they're hot and heavy. So
What I find really interesting about their relationship over the course of these last few episodes is, and especially when in reference to this particular episode, because there are a lot of problematic things about it, especially when it comes to sexuality and consent and things like that, is that Oz and, you know, and obviously considering what Buffy and Willow talk about in the next scene, Willow as well, are both very clear about their boundaries. And, you know, Oz said in the last episode, I think, that, you know, he wasn't going to kiss her until, you know, essentially, I'm not going to kiss you till it's right or whatever. We're not going to kiss until it's right. And I think that's a really mature way to even portray a relationship at this point or any point. You know, couples don't even today have those conversations on television. So interesting stuff.
Yeah, most shows don't do relationships well because they feel they have to switch things up and, like, you know, the Ross and Rachel bullshit, are they, aren't they, whatever. And there's very few shows out there that do relationships correctly and know that comedy can be sustained, comedy and conflict can be sustained, and drama if someone stays together. Yeah. I think Mike Schur shows are the only ones that do that well. With, like, Parks and Rec, Brooklyn Nine-Nine, he is able to get couples into really good and loving relationships and still create conflict, but most shows don't know how to do that.
I mean, it's a huge problem with everything. I mean, the comic industry is super bad about this kind of stuff. Like, you have all of these iconic couples that end up getting split up because it's like, married couples aren't interesting. And it's like, well, you're just a shit writer.
Right. Yeah. Married couples can be really interesting if you do it right and you just give them, you know, as long as they're not just sitting there, you know, staring into each other's eyes and, you know, making, you know, baby talk at each other all the time, you can actually have them do stuff.
Yeah, well, I mean, like the whole, you know, staring into each other's eyes and, you know, baby talk. I mean, that's a very immature idea of what a relationship is.
Absolutely.
A relationship's a partnership. I mean, you might have that in the beginning, but eventually you just become like this very strong unit. And I don't think they ever let people get to that point.
The only other relationship in this Buffy Angel verse that sort of is on parallel until the writers went and screwed it up was Gunn and Fred.
Yeah, I was actually going to mention Gunn and Fred, that they actually had a very strong relationship until season 4 happened. And
right, and this is ridiculous. I'm like, because they wanted her with Wesley and whatever. We'll get there.
No, so I was just saying, like, in terms of throwback, if you look at something even as far back as like Nick and Nora Charles, I mean, they're a married couple and they're detectives, and there's there's comedy there, and there's drama and there's mystery. So you can do it if you know what you're doing. As you said, they can be a really strong unit together instead of just having to be like, you know, I don't know, just useless. So yeah.
I think part of the problem is that, I mean, and this is a problem through a lot of fiction. I think, Emcee, when you brought up comic books, I think this is particularly a problem in comics, is there is this mistaken concept that plot is more important than character. And what we're talking about is character issues, and comic books, of course, it's like, well, it's all about people punching each other, so therefore we can't, like, so compared to that, married couples aren't interesting in their view because they're not, you know, there's no action going on. And people and the writers are more concerned with stuff happening in a more like visually and physical sense than happening in a relationship between two people.
Or I think they also feel that like angst is more interesting than like joy, so that you have to have these characters like moping around, oh, woe is me, oh, so-and-so has left me or died or whatever. And so it's more interesting to do that. I mean, I think Joss says that too. Isn't he on record as saying something like he doesn't like happy couples? He only likes, you know, which is why he's constantly killing people off or breaking them up and making things cataclysmic, which is silly, as you
Yeah.
said. It's immature
Yeah.
to some extent.
Yeah, I mean, like, if you look at Buffy and Angel before they broke up, they were really fucking boring because everything about them was, staring into each other's eyes and, oh, this forbidden love that we have, and, when I kiss you, I want to die. And it's like, yeah, that's really fucking boring.
Yeah. But that's exactly it, is that the problem is a lot of writers either take there has to be action thing, or they go completely the other way and say, oh, well, they're a couple and therefore they can't actually have problems. They have to always be just fine and boring. Whereas like a real couple can be very happy together, work well together, and still have things that they have to work out.
Yeah, I mean, the only time I've seen, loving healthy relationships on television is when you look at sitcoms. When or like if the couple, like a family sitcom where the couple was together before you even, like Blackish or something like that, or like I said, Mike Schur shows that have very healthy relationships and still have a lot of drama and still have a lot of conflict. And yeah, I'm sorry, I just love Mike Schur. I've been rewatching Good Place this week, so
it's okay.
So good.
When
so good.
I was writing my virtual series, actually, one of my goals was to subvert this Joss Whedon-ish trope of all couples must be miserable, because I had Connor get a girlfriend, and he was with her like as soon as he got together with her. They had like one like minor rough patch, but it was like solid throughout the entire thing, because it's like Joss liked to break people up because that was that he felt that made it interesting, but it became so much of a trope for Joss that you were just always waiting for the other shoe to drop. Then I'm like, no, do you know what? It's actually more interesting if you have the couple like stay together and figure out how to have them, function.
No, I will give them this. A lot of couples in the Buffyverse stay together for quite a while. It's not the like, what is it, Bonanza syndrome, where like little Joe has a new girlfriend that tragically dies every week, or the Sam and Dean thing, right, from Supernatural. At least the Buffy couples stay together for. I mean, Willow and Alls are together for 2 years. 3, 4.
They're together for
like 2 years,
almost 3. Yeah,
almost 3. Willow and Tara together for about
the same.
3, about the same, and Buffy and Riley are together for a good 2 seasons, and
Xander and Anya are together forever.
Xander and Anya are together for
they're together for 2 seasons.
While.
They're together for 2 seasons. They get together in season 4,
so,
and
at least there is some of that dynamic, but then eventually everyone's
the Buffyverse is serial monogamous.
But then he's got to, it's always something tragic has to happen, and I think my biggest thing here, I mean, it's not Buffyverse, but Zoe and Wash is like, it's always like you always know the shoe is going to drop, unfortunately, with Joss stuff, which is a shame, because you can have some really good couples, and they do it in other genres, I think, and especially in mysteries and stuff. A lot of times you have like strong couples that stay together. So
I mean, like, I do know that Joss was planning to subvert it with Zoe and Wash. Wash dying was entirely him reacting to the show being canceled and knowing he only had the shot with the movie. He was being mean. He
was.
He had planned to keep them together, like, solid. Like, he has talked about that. Zoe and Wash were just always going, if the show had kept going, they would have stayed steady.
So basically say F you to your fans instead in a movie. Thanks.
Helpful.
So back to the episode.
Yes, back to the episode.
The Buffy and Willow scene right there, I actually really love, and I love the way Willow says, "Oh, I have a friend. I will go to her." And then, does anybody else still say smoochies?
No,
I do.
Ever said
I
it
do.
Oh, I do it. That's like kissing is smoochies to me ever since this episode, and to my friends. Anytime we've gossiped, it's like, so how was your date? I don't need to know the gory details, but were there smoochies?
Before we get the Willow and Buffy scene, we do get a small scene of Oz and Larry.
Oh God, yeah, that's really important.
Yeah, and well, we're establishing Oz as part
a human
of the
being.
School. Yeah, and like as horrible horrible as I find Larry, I find it really interesting that he acknowledges Willow as an attractive girl and not like this social pariah that they've tried to, play up throughout the first, season and a half. Because, I mean, like, even though he doesn't mean it because he's gay, he still recognizes that, he can use Willow's a hot girl to hide behind. So
Right.
Great point.
Yeah.
Yeah.
This is about where they give up on trying to make Willow not
hot.
woman.
Yeah.
She's a nerdy hot, which I'm into.
I'm all about nerdy hot.
Yeah.
So I am nerdy hot. So that's kind of
Yeah.
I am kind of glad that they did that. Oz basically does use a semi-intellectual retort to Larry.
Oh my god, I was just gonna say.
They didn't like go into the usual Larry going, What do you mean? They just like basically he just gives a look and that's over.
Yeah. That line, you've really
mistake.
mastered the single entendre. That's one of my most oft repeated lines.
That's a good one. A good one. I would have probably gotten suspended like 80 times for like kicking Larry in the balls.
I probably would have
because it was the 90s and they didn't understand men being disgusting getting actually punished for it. So,
boys will be boys.
Yeah.
It's also the 90s. They would have argued that, he's a man and a woman can't hit him. So clearly, you wouldn't have gotten in trouble. But my actual point is, so I have a tendency to, obviously, because it's my degree and I'm an asshole, but looking at things, and we do that anyway through a feminist lens, but I want to talk about like themes of consent throughout this episode.
Mm-hmm.
Obviously Larry's, they're not subtle with the metaphor they're using here at all. They're about as a bag of bricks. As far as like animal instincts and sex and teen sex and all that. Yeah. Okay. But also I want to talk about themes of consent in the actual mythology of werewolves. In this particular mythology, 3 days, they don't choose this at all. And I guess that could be said for a lot of monsters within the Buffyverse, but in this particular, within the like storyline of this episode, I think it's interesting that they chose to use something that happens to someone.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
In a almost violent way as a sort of, I'd like to see it as a sort of, what's the word I'm looking for? Help me here.
Metaphor?
Thank you. Metaphor for like assault.
Yeah.
Essentially.
Honestly, I think we'll get into that even more when we get to Wild at Heart.
Yes.
Oh, for sure.
Yeah.
I think the thesis statement, the metaphor is a little flawed in this episode. Because it's like, is it consent? Is it all men are gross animals? Right? Except the person that's the actual animal is the respectful guy that talks things out, and Giles.
Mm-hmm. And Giles.
Right.
And Giles.
When it comes to Buffy episodes, this is a little bit different on Angel when they approach werewolves, but most of the werewolf episodes deal with this toxic masculinity thing, where this episode very much has a lot of homophobia and sexism. And then the next time we deal with werewolves heavily, we'll get into domestic abuse, and then we'll get into much more consent and like infidelity, and then the final one is like the dissolution of a relationship and the discovery of this lesbian relationship.
Right.
So looking at the way this is written, again, it's very ham-fisted, but I think it's these two writers tend to sort of have that, like, we're going to point out sexism by having these men be so gross, but the way it's done is gross in and of itself, and the whole, like, and just, yeah. And
yeah,
it does. And these two writers are so incredibly slut shamey. They're always having women attack on other women. And that same thing continued when they were the showrunners on that 70s show, which I used to watch before I now hate the show and really have thought about it, right? And grossness and yeah. But same thing, they're always having women just like, yes, Logan.
Oh, what? Oh,
yes,
hey,
Logan.
That's me.
Yes, Logan.
Yeah, especially because I'm sure we all know about the cut scene they did between Cordy and Willow.
Yes.
In gym class, but even before that, the 1-800 I'm dating a skanky hoe or whatever.
Yeah.
Like
even though Cordy and Willow are actually really nice to each other in
they
this episode.
have no idea how the fuck they want Willow and Cordelia to be acting with each other.
I know.
It seemed like out of nowhere. I mean, last week she was screaming, "Oh, you hate," "Oh, you're with somebody you hate," rather than being with me. And then all of a sudden now they're like BFFs ish.
Well, I don't think Willow's problem was really Cordelia in that situation. Willow's problem was she thought, Xander was her possession.
But you'd think that she would avoid Cordelia because she's angry about the whole situation rather than suddenly like not cozying up to her per se, but they're much friendlier this week than they have been in other weeks. So
yeah, I think that that sudden weird rapport between Cordy and Willow is again a part of the ham-fisted approach to the writing here. Mm-hmm. It's like that's there so Xander gets to have the line about how it's time to panic. Mm-hmm. As like more than because it organically grows out of anything.
Yeah. Not even considering what happened in the last couple of episodes with Willow and Cordelia and Xander, but just looking at this episode by itself with the 1-800 I'm dating a skanky hoe line, and then as Logan pointed out, there was a confrontation between Cordelia and Willow cut out in which they're sniping at each other and Cordelia makes a crack about the phony girl next door attitude, and Willow says you could be the girl next door if Xander lived next door to a brothel.
Oh God.
And so they had this all ready and filmed and they just cut it out. But then you immediately go to that scene at the Bronze and they're, bitching about their lives. And it's like, there's such a disconnect there. You can't just jump to that.
I mean, they're sitting on the couch together, basically, gossiping, girl gossiping. And it's like, when did Cordelia suddenly become like Willow's close friend that she would do this? I mean, even with anything else, it's like, yes, if the other lines there, it's just really weird. It makes no sense in terms of their dynamic together at all. It just seems to fit the narrative because that's what they wanted at that moment.
And correct me if I'm wrong, it really never happens much again. Cordelia and Willow actually talking to each other.
Not really. But
not
honestly,
much.
I would have not had a problem with that scene had they not had the skanky hoe line in there.
Yeah, no, for
because
sure.
it wasn't necessary.
No, I would have loved to see Willow and Cordelia, or Cordelia and Buffy, or Cordelia and, I don't know, Oz talking to each other more often, because most of the time Cordelia's only there to drive them around, do some research. She's super supportive of them, but they're not supportive to her back.
Yeah.
Right. And she should, considering she is part of the Scooby Gang, even with the whatever weirdness is going on with Xander, that doesn't mean that everybody else wouldn't talk to her.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So.
We talked about this last week or the week before last. At this point, Cordelia is firmly part of the gang.
Yes.
And Xander's relationship seems to be out in the open at this point.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, because if Willow knew about it, she had to have said to at least to Buffy, if not to, Oz. And
they're waiting for the guys at the Bronze. They're like talking in the hall.
They're canoodling in public when
they're
Xander's
canoodling in public. Yeah. So I think Cordy and Xander's relationship is out. And we're going to see that.
We will find that out more next week. Yeah.
Next week. But people know.
Yeah.
I forgot we were doing that episode next week.
Yeah. One thing we did skip over is Larry's, blatant sexual harassment of.
Is it Teresa, right?
Teresa.
It wasn't Teresa. I thought it was another girl. And
no, that was a different. Right.
Yeah.
When she knocks over her books in the hall.
Oh, okay. We're not talking about
again. That is where I was like, I would have kicked him in the balls. Like my feminist rage, even in 1993, was pretty much. Obviously, I've always had feminist rage, but it's just sort of in my nature. But he would have getting screamed at, and I would have been in the principal's office all the time.
Though I have to say, like, I mean, I hate him for what he did and using these girls to try and, you know, cover up his own insecurities. But there is a Star Wars book that just came out called From a Certain Point of View, which covers minor characters throughout the first movie. And so, like, you know, here's from their perspective. I would love if they did, like, a Buffy book like that, and phases would be from Larry's point of view.
Oh, that would be so interesting.
Yeah, because, I mean, like, considering the harsh turn that he makes at the end of this episode, like, I don't condone Larry doing this.
The character of Larry, it's actually, there's a kernel of truth there. I've known other people who went through similar things because they are covering up, because they are closeted, whatever. So Larry himself as a character is not out of the realm of possibility. He's supposed to be dislikable, etc. It's how the whole thing kind of comes out in the end, especially Xander's reaction to it. So,
but yeah, Larry's a caricature in his behavior, not a character. Is that right? Does that make sense?
You could say that. In fact, I actually
people who acted along those lines. I mean, granted, Larry is like more cartoonish, for lack of a better word, than, you know, more of a caricature, but it's not. His motivations are not completely out of the realm of reality, if that makes any sense.
Right, but there's still no excuse for that kind of assaulting behavior. I mean, and after this episode, I actually really like Larry.
Yeah, I'm not saying it's an excuse, but I'm saying I've known
Larry,
I knew people who behaved that way. Yeah. Perhaps not that high a level of darkness, but yeah.
Right. It's the difference between it's the clash of the realistic and the good.
Yeah.
And I want to get your take on this. Is like, because they have so much. There's a lot of horrible in this episode. I mean, obviously Larry before he comes out, and Kane is just miserable.
Oh, God.
But my question is, do you think doing what they did with these characters might have worked if they hadn't been so ham-handed about it?
I think
is there a way you could do this reasonably?
I think if the writer had been like a freaking woman and not like a clueless, and I don't know anything about these two writers' sexualities, but they write like straight dudes. I'm sorry, they do.
Yeah.
You know, so maybe if there's a more nuanced perspective and a little bit of rewriting, and maybe the whole pointing out sexism while still being super sexist doesn't work, though.
Well, with Kane, which we will get more into later, I think the only thing that saves his character is that Jack Connolly does a really good job.
Truth.
And Larry does redeem himself later, and I actually, like I said, I am interested in his story. Like, what he does is reprehensible. But if you actually look at what he's doing, there's such a sad self-loathing. Like, I can just picture him going home, and it's like, oh my God, I can't believe that I did that. Because he immediately changes doing that kind of stuff as soon as he's able to, like, come to terms with himself. It's like he's attacking other people. Well, he kind of says that. He attacks other people because he wants to attack himself.
Right, but that's what a lot of bullies do. So that's what I'm saying. It rings true in that he is such a high-level jerk because he doesn't have self-awareness until things change, and unfortunately that's the ham-handed part to me. But Kane is just a reprehensible character, but I feel like he's a paint-by-number villain. He's just like so over the top, dun dun dun, you know, look at me, I'm so evil, I'm wearing, you know, claws on my necklace, oh look at me, I'm evil.
I know we're not really getting into Kane, but when we do, I would like to make the argument that Kane is a serial killer. Thank you.
Oh, well, there's no argument there. So before that, we actually get the first appearance of the werewolf, and it starts out with with the most stereotypical, like, urban legend, like, you know, scary story of,
if it wasn't going to be a werewolf, it was going to be a dude with a hook for a hand.
I know, right?
Yeah.
Right. I do have to, let's talk about Cordelia saying, my father still thinks I'm a good girl. I was actually thinking about this, and back in Reptile Boy, Cordelia was taken as a virgin sacrifice. So
we argued about her having sex for so long, and we forgot about Reptile Boy.
Yeah. Back in Reptile Boy, she was taken as a virgin sacrifice, which was episode 5 of this season. So between then and now, apparently she's not a good girl. I'm kind of wondering if maybe Cordelia and Xander and Cordelia and Devin just really subscribed to the 90s. I did not have sexual relations with that woman mentality.
Yeah, I mean, there's many, many ways to quote unquote not be a good girl. Like, I think Cordy's been the everything but girl.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But not but.
You never know. Though I actually do think that they originally intended Xander and Cordelia to be in a sexual relationship.
Oh,
it's
sure.
Just in season 3 they decided, oh, well, we want to have a big de-virginizing scene for Xander.
Right. Yeah. No, that makes sense.
Yeah, because for losing a virginity always has to be a big fucking deal, apparently.
I
know.
Yeah, because to me, like, Cordy and Xander just, like, radiate, they're having, like, hot, not illicit, sex, in quotes. And they're and she's fine with it, which, to me, like, Cordy is just very body positive. She's very positive about herself. And, it's ridiculous that they're not, so...
Yeah, I mean, and Xander is such a Xander in this scene too, because he's not paying a bit of it. I mean, Cordelia is in the car wanting to do stuff and actually wanting to acknowledge that they're in a relationship publicly. So, like, and Xander's just being. Oh God, fucking Xander.
I will actually pick up on some of these threads in a later scene because I have a theory that I need to get into, and it does not have to do with bunnies.
Oh man, is it a demon? A dancing demon?
No. But here is a question that I have: what the fuck happens to Oz after that first night? Like, where does he rolls off the roof of a car, and we know that things that affect the werewolf does affect him the next day. So you would think that he might be in a little bit of pain. And where did he wake up that, he woke up naked somewhere?
So I have a quasi theory here.
I'm sorry.
Maybe that's not actually Oz.
I did briefly consider that, but it looked so much like the werewolf that Oz turns into later that...
Well, maybe it's Geordie. They are related.
That's true.
Yeah, here's my question. In other werewolf lore, the werewolf stays near and around the basic size of themselves. Like, what kind of physiology does it take to make a guy that's like 5'4" turn into like 6'5"?
Mm-hmm.
I don't like and Geordie's like a little kid, right?
He's 10, yeah. Maybe there's another werewolf.
Yeah. I'm not going to throw in another werewolf because, that's just going way too far outside of, It's like, you could say that about everything. It's like, maybe there was somebody else. And it's like, it just...
Right. That just answers your question about what happened to Oz.
Yeah, well, the thing is, no matter what, Oz turned into a werewolf that night.
Yeah.
I'm not absolutely sure about that because I'm unclear about when Geordie bit him and how long it takes for that to actually take effect.
He said last week, didn't he, when they were in gym?
Did he say last week? Okay, maybe so.
Yeah. Because Larry was like, last week he's not. That was Larry. Larry was like, last week a giant dog jumped out of the bushes and bit me.
Yeah.
And then all Oz said was, tell me about it. My cousin Geordie got his grown-up teeth in.
Well, it does not make any sense to me that it should happen, between the first and the second, transformation. Because, they go to school, they find out about, the werewolf, then they're in school.
Well, there's no mark on Oz, so it stands to reason that it's been a bit of time.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Because Geordie would have had to have bitten him hard enough to transmit whatever they consider... I don't know, his mystical spit into his... I don't like the way I put that. Sorry, y'all.
Virus. Yeah. I like to think of lycanthropy as a virus. It's a mystical virus.
Okay.
So...
Then I've exhausted my reasons to clear up your question.
Because the writers are dumb.
Okay, yeah. Go back to that.
And their werewolf lore is all over the place, sort of like their vampire lore. So
I don't know. Maybe it's just that Oz is such a hard partying musician that
clearly. Maybe
he woke up in his backyard and is like, okay.
Crowd surfed or something. And he's always sort of like zen about things. He's like, well, this is fine, I guess. Maybe I sleepwalk.
He woke up and he didn't have a context yet. And it's not until okay.
Because when he did, he immediately called and he was like, hey, are y'all werewolves? Okay.
Cordelia mourning her car and then figuring out that it's a werewolf. And I want to know why Giles doesn't keep track of the moon cycle.
It's a good question.
Well, did they... I mean, he acknowledged that this was his first encounter. He didn't really even know anything about werewolves.
Well, I mean, you would think that the moon... We've already had the moon cycle be important for different rituals or whatever. And also, Willow knows the moon cycle. It does not make sense to me that Giles should not know that it's not the full moon and that Willow should.
Yeah, that's a little inconsistent.
It's a really small point, but yeah, it just feels like Giles should keep track of the moon just because of different rituals and different prophecies and all this different kind of stuff.
Like most witches, I mean, most people who are mystically bent keep track of the moon cycle for so many reasons that, it makes no sense that Giles wouldn't have been.
And Willow's going to do the same thing later in season 4 when Oz comes back. She's going to be like, I haven't been tracking the cycles I've forgotten about the moon. You know, I'm like, dude, you're
a fucking practicing witch. Yeah.
Right, you're exactly. A practicing witch. How do you not know the cycles?
Not only that, but okay, they have not dealt with werewolves yet. But as Giles says, it's one of the classics. So maybe it's something you want to keep an eye out for.
Truth. Yeah. Truth. Giles. I do like Oz comforting Willow about the bunnies. That's pretty great.
Although my thought was, he says, those bunnies can take care of themselves. And that sounds almost a little ominous. I'm like, does Anya have something later on? Are bunnies a lot more dangerous than we give them credit for?
True. But I know if you've had Watership Down, you know that bunnies are fucking tough. So
yes.
And then we get into the scene, the self-defense class, which is so ham-fisted. And
it is.
Yeah.
It is.
That's
not
probably the
necessary
scene in the whole show.
Yeah.
In some ways, it is. I mean, for one thing is like when Willis says to Buffy, remember you're supposed to be a girly girl like the rest of us.
I wanted to punch her there.
Haven't we gotten past the point where anybody believes that?
The show was great for girl power. It's like, you can only have power as long as you are supernaturally endowed. Fuck that.
Well, yeah, but even beyond that, I'm just like practically. Like, nobody in school believes that Buffy's just a regular girl at this point.
But the thing is that, what is a regular girl? I mean, Buffy has never been one who's, like, tripping around in, like, frilly dresses and, playing, like, dumb blonde, whatever. And that's okay. I mean...
No, but
what
as someone who
mean? Yeah.
Well, in this scene, it means someone who can't beat up a guy. And I don't think anyone believes that.
Yeah, but I mean, even if people don't believe that... I don't think that Buffy needs to hide the fact that the fact that Willow is shaming her for her powers.
Truth.
And basically like this idea that there is something that a girl must be. That is what bothers me.
Right.
Is she shaming her or trying to protect her?
Well, she's trying to protect her, but it's like
it's a shaming thing.
Well, the language, like I said, these two writers that always wrote their scripts together for Buffy, they don't have any real nuance into what they're writing about. I mean, I don't know how this episode will be saved, but if Marty or Jane had written that, I don't think that line would have been there. Mm-hmm. And I think the show hasn't hired enough female writers to, I don't know what I'm saying, but you know what I'm saying.
Marty or Jane wouldn't have written a story wherein girl power is so one-dimensional. I mean, just think about, 5 seasons in the future and Buffy's Are You Ready to Be Strong speech, which is...
Sure.
And we also have Xander being gross and possessive again.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
All the women around him. Literally all the women around him. Yeah. Like, why don't you just pee on them, Xander, since you think they all belong to you?
Yeah, and I mean, like... Oz, putting Willow's tag back in. I mean, it's so cute and...
Gentle.
it's very, very real. That's a thing a guy who likes another girl, cares about a woman, will do. Or, it's just a thing. It's a sign of affection. It was beautiful.
Yeah, and Xander is trying to ruin it by being gross and
Making it
possessive.
dirty.
Yeah.
Ooh.
Because Xander can't stand to not have Willow paying attention to him.
Yeah, because he got
And
used to having that crush,
Yeah.
and it made him feel really good that
And Cordelia, while she makes him feel good in other ways, and actually I think they do like each other, she doesn't put up with his shit the way that Willow has always put up with his shit.
Xander always treats the women who are interested in him like shit.
She does. He's very shaming.
Yeah,
and we're gonna get into this later when he's with Anya, but he constantly undermines her self-esteem, who she is, tells her to be different than who she is, to stop being so weird. There's just these
blatant, just the most blatant sexual violation that with Larry just grabbing Buffy's ass.
Yeah, that was
grinding
just,
on her.
Yeah.
When I saw that, I was just like, what?
Yeah, where the fuck did that teacher go? I know it was the 90s and people would let shit go, but I mean, he just his hand just
smacks her ass.
Yeah.
Back in the 70s, that kind of shit went on too. But the fact that nobody else walked up and punched him in the face, I mean, people would still have other people's backs. And stop it. That was just insanity.
There was more subtlety on Mad Men.
Yeah, I was surprised standards and practices didn't go no.
Yeah.
Really?
Well, as long as it wasn't two girls together, it's fine, right?
Yeah.
And we get Giles explaining how werewolves work, and
he gets props. He gets to use props.
The moon pie, just that moment where Giles giggles. Yes, right, moon pie.
I love that.
I'm sorry.
How does he?
You know how I am about Giles. It was just 20,000
in the US
for
for a while.
Yeah, he's been in the U.S. for at least 2 years.
Yeah.
But he's been in the U.S. in California.
They have
are
pies
they just
there.
Southern?
Do they have moon pies? I don't
We
know.
have moon pie. We have moon pies. I can walk across the street in New Mexico and get a moon pie.
Well, just if you're wondering how Giles knew about them, how did Xander know about them if they're not in California? I'm pretty sure they are. So
I think I've seen them in rest stops and stuff. I think they're kind of a generic. You can get them everywhere. But.
Yeah, you can.
Yes.
Okay, so my nitpick. Oh, I've got one. Is when they say, okay, so the werewolf is only something 28 days out of the month. Yes, technically a month, a 30 to 31 day month, but a werewolf is only not human. You know what I'm trying to say? 26 out of...
Right, 25 or 26 days out of 28.
26 days out of 28 days, because that's an actual lunar cycle, not a 30-day. I get what they're trying to say, but technically...
Yeah, well, was it the full moon or the new moon? So they really don't know anything about their moon cycles. Again, this episode has another one of my most oft-repeated lines, and it's actually not oft-repeated, but I will post this GIF every time I post a headcanon or theory. I didn't jump, I took a tiny step, and their conclusions...
Oh, yes.
Their conclusions were... Totally, me too.
That's in my SIG file. Yeah, that
is definitely one that is.
Yeah, it is perfect. If I ever get back to doing my theory videos on YouTube, I want to put that into the opening because it's so good.
Yeah, that's definitely one of those.
One thing about Buffy, the Buffyverse in general, they have a lot of continuity problems with their werewolves, but they've never wavered in their moral positioning on them.
True.
Yeah, with the exception of Veruca, who will come up later.
Who's kind of a rapist, so...
We will totally get into... Oh, I have so many feelings. But other than that, every werewolf we have met is a regular person with this thing that happens to them. And I think it's mostly just... Veruca's just a bad person.
She sucks.
Yeah.
She does suck.
And her band sucks too. Actually, I kind of like them. Yeah, where are we in the episode at this point? Are they in the woods yet?
We are just getting up to, them going to search for the werewolf and meeting up with Kane.
Giles
Yeah.
pretending like he doesn't know what those
Yep.
people are doing in those cars.
Yeah,
That's what you were
right.
like when you were a child.
Yeah,
You were
see, I don't
nasty.
buy that at all. And actually, there was one bit that I actually kind of liked where Giles says, "Have you seen anything?" And Buffy goes, "Yeah, she's like being out with this guy, but he's seeing this other girl." And it's like, and I was like, I actually like that because it's like slaying hasn't taken over Buffy's life so much that she's
Yeah.
totally not a teenager anymore.
Yeah, for sure.
Important.
It's like it's not
Absolutely.
just as gossip is. It's like, okay, she's being an actual teen for once,
And she's
which is nice.
enough a part of the school that she knows who these people are. And, you
And
know,
the
Right.
dynamic.
Oh, yeah.
the dynamics, yes. So this episode has possessiveness over women, sexual harassment, and now with the introduction of Kane, ephebophilia, because he's all like, "Oh, so you're here with, her, good to get the fruit while it's fresh."
Right. I love that Giles' immediate reaction is like, "You're gonna want to take that back, my dude, because I will kick your ass."
Yeah,
Truth.
when Giles calls him a pillock, my note was pillock seems insufficient here.
Yeah. Yeah, no,
Yeah.
Kane's disgusting, but I love Jack Connolly.
Oh, he gives a wonderful performance
Yeah,
as
it's
a
just like,
horrible person.
Yeah. He will be even better on Angel as Sajan.
We get to enjoy him more. Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, is that the same guy that plays
It's the same
Sajan?
guy who plays Sajan, yeah.
Oh. Yeah, he's great.
Yeah.
Good on that dude.
Yeah, and I've seen him in other things, and he often plays very kind of similar, like these gruff type roles, but he's really, really good at it.
yeah, it's just the way he's written. Like I said, he's just like such a cartoon villain, evil, gross, oozing whatever. It's just, yeah.
There is another bit of discontinuity when it comes to werewolves later on, because we have Kane here who specifically wants to kill and skin a werewolf and take their teeth and their organs and this kind of shit. Meanwhile, when we get over onto Angel with the introduction of Nina, I can't remember what her... Unleashed, that was her first episode. They specifically have to serve werewolves tartare because werewolves revert back at death.
Isn't she a specific kind of werewolf?
That is true.
She's a rare kind of werewolf.
She's like a
whereas,
subbreed, yeah.
Yeah, North American werewolves are more common and they don't revert back.
Okay. Fair enough.
Is that
Okay.
not right? It's been a really long time since
Well,
I've
I mean,
watched
they
Angel
do
Girls,
they do mention that she was a different kind of werewolf, and I think that was just so that they could not have to use the werewolf costumes that they use later on in this show,
Oh,
which
God,
we will
right,
talk
yeah.
about a lot.
Yes.
I find the werewolf costume in this to be ridiculous and bad, but adorably bad and very like, hey, it's the 90s, we got a low budget, we're going with it.
At
you
least
know?
it looked like a wolf.
True.
Yeah. I mean, I was actually rewatching this. My mom happened to like walk in the room and she just like burst out laughing. She's like, "What are you watching? That's so stupid looking." I'm like, "Yeah, it's a werewolf. Don't ask." It's
Yeah,
I mean,
when it
dogs
comes in-
are made of plungers, so
Yeah.
and
Well-
kids were scared of them.
the werewolf comes in way above my low bar for just horrible animal costumes, which is the polar bear in Santa Claus Conquers the Martians, because that is just astonishingly bad.
Yeah, but it's a bad werewolf suit. But if you look at the later werewolf suits, where they don't even look, it looks like some sort of simian later on.
Yeah, you're
Yeah.
right. This one is
And
actually.
so this one actually
you're right,
does.
This one is better.
Yeah, this one it's a poor suit, but it looks like it's like if I were to look at
But
it,
it looks
I'd be
like
like, that's a
werewolf.
werewolf.
Yeah.
and it's still better than the werewolf in Prisoner of Azkaban. So yeah,
Which that one had very little excuse because that was a very high budget movie.
yeah, and it was CGI, and it looks like a Chihuahua.
Oh, I
Okay.
did actually want to say one last thing about the scene with Kane.
Yes.
Buffy gets in a good Nazi joke at the end.
Yes, mine furrier.
Yes.
Right.
It's a good one.
Yeah, so we get to the scene with Angelus and Teresa.
Poor Teresa.
Poor Teresa. Honestly, I'm not trying to victim blame, but Angel was being so fucking creepy.
Yeah,
Well, but there's precedent. The way she reacted to Larry was pretty naive as well.
Yeah.
True.
He was not being subtle. He was being fucking gross, and she was like, "Actually, I think there are more people in our group." So
Yeah,
you know.
okay.
Well, and
fair
I,
enough.
and it it's furthering this complicated theme of men are predators.
Mhm.
Angel, we know, is 100% a sexual predator. We know this. And we'll get to know this even more when we get those flashbacks and becoming and stuff. But, I mean, it's like men as predators, animals.
Yeah.
And I think that's sort of the parallel there.
I'm just saying that he was not being subtle in the fact that he was really fucking creepy. And if Teresa was scared at that moment, I would be
she
scared
should
of
have just
Angel.
like run away.
Okay, I'm sorry. When I was 16 years old, if a man that looked like that walked up to me, even if he was slightly creepy, I'd be like, all right, let's go.
Yeah, that was honestly the only explanation that I could find for it.
I mean, honestly, I'd be like, because I did some dumb stuff just because the dude was good looking and I couldn't see past good looking.
Yeah. We don't get a good look at it, but this is the first appearance of the Angela Skyliner.
Okay.
Oh.
Yeah.
We'll see it better in later episodes, but yes, we got some.
I do
Angela
love
Skyliner.
a good guy liner.
He,
I really do. Love
he rocks
liner.
it pretty well.
Yeah.
I love a good guy.
Then we get to the scene that we've already talked about it a lot with Willow and Cordelia, which I love that scene.
Right.
I just wish that we had
couple of guys.
We had earned this scene, and the only way we didn't need to earn this scene. We just needed to not
think it's so improbable.
That earlier slut shamey bit.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
If they had just cut that out, then I would have been just like, oh, okay, so the scene happens. Like
they both realize that Xander's a fucking jackass, and they can sort of bond over it.
Mayhem with the werewolf and attacking the bronze, and then Buffy comes in, and then Kane comes in. And he's
listen. If the bronze would just invest a large amount of money initially to really fortify that building, the shit would stop happening, and they would have to stop spending money on rebuilding windows and putting bricks back together. Like, let's just think more for farther into the future is all I'm saying. It's bad business practice.
And I feel like, they are aware that, that shit is going down, so it's like, let's work things out.
At worst, they think they live in a really, dangerous area of town.
Yeah, they're
gang
getting damage at least once a week.
Yeah, they're supposed to be in the bad area of town. It's one block from the good area of town.
Yeah.
Because Sunnydale's supposed to be really small, except for having an airport and a
UC.
army base and
an inordinate amount of
and a large university.
Yeah, and a large university.
A
of
UC.
California.
It's a UC university. I know it's a fictional one, but it's part of the UC system.
Yeah.
It's got everything that it needs when it needs it.
Just like Clark Kent.
Yeah, basically it's the TARDIS version of a small town. So, Logan, did you want to talk a little bit about Kane?
I really want to talk about how Kane is a serial killer.
He totally
Kane
is.
knows these are human beings. He knows it. He's fine with it. He has a ritual, and whether or not he does it for profit, there's no denying that he keeps trophies.
Mm-hmm.
I would not be surprised if he did not, as a child, complete the triad. Probably still wets the bed, definitely sets fires, and makes a living out of torturing animals. So
it's like he's almost like a supernatural version of Dexter, where he's justifying the fact that he's killing these people, where it's like, they're werewolves, they're not real people, they're, gonna kill people, so I'm just doing everybody a favor and making a profit on it while I'm at it.
Yeah.
So, Logan, are you saying that we're diagnosing him with antisocial personality disorder?
Listen, I'm not here to diagnose anybody.
I'm totally fine. I'm fine with diagnosing fictional people.
Yeah, I don't think the Goldwater rule applies here.
Right, no, they're fictional. So, and I actually find it kind of fun, but this one is just an easy, antisocial personality disorder.
It's interesting actually, because, his justification that, 3 days out of the month, they're a danger.
I will say it's not even 3 days out of the month they're a danger. It's not even 3 full days. It's
just from moonrise to moonset.
Right, it's 12 hours over 3, 12, you know what I'm trying to say. Yeah.
Yeah, no, he has no justification. He's greedy. He wants to cause pain.
He lusts after teenage girls. He's just gross.
He's gross, yeah. I would like to know, after that conversation and we get the news report about Teresa, how were they able to go through all of the appropriate channels to get that report on Teresa on the radio within hours of her death?
Oh.
It's
Plot?
It's total plot bullshit.
The plot needed it.
Yeah, because I mean, she was killed like sometime, like probably around 9 o'clock at night, and so you're telling me by like 5 or 6 in the morning they're having a news report on her death? No, no.
Well, honestly, if as someone who grew up in small towns, and even our big towns here are small towns, despite its abnormally like large pool of resources, Sunnydale is as small as they're making it out to be. Yeah, it's entirely conceivable that like local news anchors would be like, we don't give a fuck. We're gonna go ahead and talk about this dead kid. Hopefully their parents know.
Fair enough.
Wow. I'm curious, as given the short time scale here, does this fit in at all with what we know about how long it takes for someone to turn?
The time it takes to turn is whatever the plot says. And like she is killed on the second night of the moon, and then she comes back on next night. And the most traditional turning that we see on any of these shows is on Angel, when Darla comes back, and that takes about a day. So I'm gonna give it to him on that.
Okay.
The next scene, we get some quality shirtless Oz action.
Oh
Yay!
my gosh. I hate to be that person, but
But you will anyway.
I back in the day, because now I feel a little creepy because I know those people are like, they're supposed to be teenagers. I know they're in their 20s, but yeah. But back in the day, I think my friends and I rewound that scene like over and over and over again, just trying to get.
I'm pretty sure I had that screen cap as like a desktop picture for a while.
Listen, Seth
Right,
Green is my
gosh.
alabaster ginger prince, and he's so petite. I want to put him in my pocket and carry him around nude.
My friend Stephanie came up for a word back just a couple years after this. Cute, small men, Frodo-tastic. And
I
Seth
love
Green
it.
is the
Seth Green
ultimate
is
example
Frodo-tastic.
of being Frodo-tastic.
Yes. And this is also one of the best act breaks that they've ever had. Like
It
I
is.
love just the huh.
Oh,
Mhm.
it
It is the perfect
Oz.
Oz reaction to this situation.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that leads us into the next scene where we find out that the laconicness like runs in Oz's family.
Yeah.
There's
Yeah.
just like no reaction from Aunt Maureen over the whole like, is Jordy a werewolf thing. You could like, I mean, you don't hear her, but it's obvious she's just like, yeah, okay.
Yeah. And it's like, does she not know that Jordy bit Oz? Because you'd think she'd at least say, oh, by the way, Jordy's a werewolf, so you may have some problems from here on out.
I can explain that away. One, I think Oz being turned this way is probably very unusual. I bet you most werewolves, don't bite people, outside of the moon. Two, if he was tickling Jordy and Jordy just took a nip at him, Oz might not have mentioned that.
Because how old is Jordy supposed to be?
He's supposed to be, well, he just got his grown-up teeth in.
Right. Well,
Right.
It's not
grown-up
10.
teeth are
I don't know what I thought that.
right, but like you don't tickle like a.
I would assume that he is probably about 6 or 7.
Okay, that's what I was
Yeah.
thinking. 5, 6,
Yeah.
7.
Yeah.
Because and that doesn't Oz meaning grown-up teeth doesn't necessarily mean actual grown-up teeth. He could have
No,
just
he may
gotten
have
some,
lost all his baby teeth and
gotten 1 or 2 grown-up teeth.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah.
I've always wanted to know like how Jordy became a werewolf.
That's a very good question.
And
like-
I think it's explained in one of the tie-in novels, but I don't think that's really canon, and I can't remember what it was. Like, was it a thing like Lupin in Harry Potter where he was like mauled as a child?
Or
sad.
I actually had a theory. We do find out later that lycanthropy is genetic. Like if Willow and Oz had had kids, the kid would have been a werewolf because Oz and was it Bariyama is the name of his wife in the comics?
I think so.
I think so,
Yeah.
They have a child and he is a werewolf. So maybe Maureen or Ken is a werewolf and passed it on to Jordy. I want to know what they're doing with Jordy. Are they crate training him?
And also, how big does he get? Because if Oz shoots up like
if Oz shoots up from teeny
foot and a half,
pocket man to
they sent him to obedience school.
Is this where Oz gets the chains from? Because that's a very suspicious box of chains.
Yeah.
Yeah, I wondered about that.
Fan fictions.
I wrote several fan fictions involving those chains.
I'm sure you did.
And of course, we're now having essentially the same set of questions that Xander will have later in the episode.
And the other question is, where are Oz's parents in all of this? I mean, we never see his family at all. Do they know?
Again, it's one of those conceits of the show that they really didn't want parents.
Yeah, they really
so it's very Charlie Brown.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, you get a little in later seasons, but besides Joyce, they really didn't want to have parents involved.
I just assume Oz's parents are somewhere being laid back.
Probably, yes. Maybe they're musicians too, and they are on tour.
They're on the road. Yeah.
There you go.
Okay, so then we move on to the scene where Oz goes to the school and is all very paranoid. And one of the only parts of Xander that I actually like in this episode, and that's where he's trying to channel his inner werewolf because he remembers from being a hyena.
But he gets busted. He gets busted.
He does.
I thought you didn't remember that. But of course, since it's Xander, they let it go. And there's going to be many times when Xander's finally called out for something and that they let it go.
But you couldn't get into it. Maybe somebody could write a fanfic where Buffy is no, we've actually got to talk about this. But I do like the whole.
True, I get it.
I'm a big bad wolf. I'm sniffing, I'm snarling. And then he looks dead at Oz and he's like, I'm Larry. And Willow tries to go after Oz and he turns her down. And I don't like Willow in this scene.
Based on what we know of his character, and I think Oz is one of the best drawn characters on the show, he's an internal processor.
Yes.
And Willow's an external processor, right? Which can work very well in a relationship, but she doesn't have the maturity to let him sort of have the space to breathe through what he needs to breathe through.
Well, I will actually take the side against Willow in this because Willow's being really fucking selfish. I know they're in a relationship that she's trying to sort out, but Oz is obviously disturbed. It is so obvious that there is something bothering him. Yeah, there is a good reason for it because Teresa was his friend. She mentions it.
Oh, yeah.
I'll play devil's advocate because, sure, perhaps put yourself in the position of an insecure 15 or 16-year-old girl.
I've been there before.
Oh, yeah, exactly. Yeah. All you're thinking is, God, why doesn't he want me? What's wrong with me? What's wrong with me? What's wrong with me? So that's the only thing looping through this kid's head. And teenagers aren't the most observant people at the best of times, much less when they're having a weird crisis. Personally, I do think it's pretty obvious that Oz is freaking the fuck out and maybe you should just give him some space. But at this point, all of her overtures, whether pure of motive or not, have been rebuffed by Oz. So she's probably starting to think, okay, well, maybe he doesn't like me the way I like him. And she's thinking about the entire Xander situation where she put in so much effort. Because, friends and will. Yeah, exactly. She's thinking about how she is perceived as this mousy little girl and maybe he doesn't really like her because he's not been receptive or whatever. So maybe that's what made her particularly blind to his distress.
It just bothers me because she points out that he was friends with Teresa, who has just been revealed to have been killed, and he is not acting normally, and she's entirely focused on her.
Right. That's what, in hindsight, knowing what will happen to Willow later, absolutely. It's one of those. She can be very selfish and very narcissistic. And I don't mean that in a diagnostic way. I just mean in a behavioral kind of way. At this point, I think as I was watching, I was like, you should just leave him alone. But I sort of got where she was coming from. If I take this just as this episode, I think I kind of devil's advocate with Logan, but knowing what's going to come later, it's a personality trait.
Also, I mean, this is not much of a defense or anything, but maybe living a lifestyle as part of the Scooby Gang you're a little more inured to people dying
Fair
than you
enough.
should be.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, that's actually a really good observation.
That's a great point, David.
So, yeah. So she's like, okay, yeah, I can see why you're upset because he's dying. But hey, we've got problems too. And it's like, oh, right. You don't get that.
Jesse who. And we're on to the next scene, which, oh boy, were there a lot of fanfics born of this scene. And I might have written 1 or 10 of them back in the day before I realized just how fucking problematic this scene actually was.
I mean, it's so comically handled. I can't take this seriously, right? You know, like, and there's such a switch in Larry between, when he is being being horrible to women, and then all of a sudden he's like, it's just done so cartoonily that I hate it.
Here is the thing, and this is my rant called How Seth Green Ruined Buffy the Vampire Slayer. And that is that this scene, and it does not make it less problematic, but Joss originally intended this scene to be basically the first sign that Xander actually was gay. And if you go back and you look at a lot of stuff that happens over the course of particularly season 2 and this episode a lot, you can kind of understand where that's coming from.
Mm-hmm.
He says Oz is attractive.
Xander is very self-sabotaging to his relationships with women. And it almost explains why he is so nasty to the girls that show interest in him. Like, he knows that he should be with Cordelia, but he wants to distance himself from being with Cordelia. I mean, he doesn't, and it could also explain why they didn't have sex with each other, even though, Cordelia seemed pretty hot to go. Joss has said several times that he was either going to have Xander or Willow turn out to be gay. I think there's a lot less foreshadowing to Willow being gay than there is to Xander.
Interesting.
Yeah.
And I think it all came down to, Joss has said that the whole storyline with Tara being killed in Dark Willow, that was originally going to happen in season 5 with Willow and Oz. But Seth Green decided to leave the show in season 4.
Because he was doing movies and stuff.
Yeah, he decided to leave in season 4, so they needed to introduce a new love interest. And by then, they had also introduced Emma Caulfield as Anya.
And everybody loved her.
So they're just like, okay, so if Oz is gone and we really like Emma, then how about we just switch around the whole which one of them is going to be gay. But honestly, if I had like Sliders, dimensional hopping capabilities, Rick and Morty style or whatever, I would love to go to the dimension where they were able to do their original plot line, because this is still a problematic scene, but actually if Xander is the one who is gay, then everything Larry is saying is true.
Right.
Yeah, I mean, and of course it's the 90s and it's Joss's show, and nobody can think on a, everybody's thinking on a binary at this point, right?
Yeah.
Like, and we'll get into this later with Willow, that, bisexuality can't possibly exist.
Don't get me started. Yeah.
Yeah. Truth. But yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, and it just, I don't know, just like the whole Xander no homo thing. And yeah, I know it's the 90s and I know, binary, blah, 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 but it just like, I really want to punch somebody so hard with all of this, because Xander, even if Xander is like in denial about his own sexuality, it still sucks so badly, and it's so badly written that I want to scream. So
yeah, I mean, his no homo gay panic, I'm just like, oh my God, can we not?
There were a lot of fics written about this scene.
There really were. And I would like to give a shout out to my bear friends that were super obsessed with Larry. Like, my Buffy watching bear friends are like, oh yeah, Larry. There needs to be more Larry.
I really loved Larry, and I actually talked with Larry Bagby online, because like back in the day he was like in some of like the Buffy groups, so like,
yeah,
I had some
that's kind of cool
with him. Like he was a pretty cool dude.
Are we now getting to Willow and Buffy talking in the library?
Yes.
Because I have a huge issue with that conversation. because it's just as problematic and sexist, that whole, ooh, let's talk about the mystery that is men. One day they're this and then they're I'm like, I just, it always bothers me when you get that whole, women can never understand men and men can never understand the women folks. And, it's just as problematic to me that they have the conversation about that than.
Well, I mean, there's also another little bit of slut shaming.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Yeah. This happens throughout this show. Like, everybody talks about this show as a paragon of feminism. And for its time, it had its place. It definitely had its place. And it definitely pushed things forward in the TV landscape.
Willow thinks she'll be a slut just because she
makes the first move.
And I mean, like, not even makes the first move, just like talks to the guy that she has gone out on several dates with about, hey, what's the state of our relationship? Do you want to make out? Like, can we move forward? I am in this place that I would like to, kiss you.
I mean, Willow generally, especially at this age, talks around things instead of talking to things. And she wants Buffy, who clearly has more experience, and I get it. It's her asking her friend. She asked Buffy to interpret things a lot. Mm-hmm. And to her credit, Buffy's like, you should maybe just talk to him about it. That'd be probably good.
Buffy should take her own advice. For being generous, it would. You could argue that this shines a light on the sort of catch-22 that women experience. She can't be forthright and forward because that's not her place. And if she does so, she's a slut. But she still wants to have sex, but she can't, not do it because she's a prude and so on and so forth. And
yeah, and a lot of it is just like women's sexual agency in general. Yeah. So, yeah.
I get that it can be interpreted that way, but I feel like it's more reinforcing those stereotypes than it is.
It's that same ham-handed writing that we're having problems with the whole way. I think if a woman wrote that scene, it would be much different. There'd be a lot more nuances that we're talking about. Mm-hmm. But because of these two assholes, it's just not.
I think there's a reason that these guys disappear after this season.
Yeah, I believe so, yeah.
They do have great one-liners, but they do disappear and go on to do other way more misogynistic things with their first. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And then we get into the Teresa scene, the Teresa slayage, which is the second best Xander scene. Like, I mean, I like him with the channeling his inner wolf, and I like his speech to Buffy. His speech to Buffy is actually really nice. It is without any sort of caveats, or it is Xander being an actual friend.
Mm-hmm. And that's what makes Xander being fucking gross so heinous, because when he's being a good friend, he's so good at it. The yellow crayon speech, that thing he says to Dawn, this moment, it makes me so mad.
This scene is actually on par with the Dawn potential speech. This is Xander talking, this is why you are important.
Exactly. And that's what I've already said it, that's what makes the majority of his character so frustrating, because it's so inconsistent with
he can be so loving and good. And there's several times, I think, when Buffy comes back, I think it's when Buffy, it's in The Freshman.
The Freshman,
when Buffy's at the Bronx, and he gives her this great speech about I had to ask myself,
it's the you're my hero.
You're my hero. What would Buffy do? And it's I'm so conflicted about Xander because he's very inconsistently written, but he does so many terrible things.
Yeah. But he does get these beautiful speeches, yeah.
But he's also so heroic. Yeah. He's also, which I guess that's what humans are like. We're kind of inconsistent. So, there's that.
This kind of scene is why it makes sense that Xander was the heart of the Ultimate Slayer.
Mm-hmm.
And he is. Yeah, he is.
Yeah.
Just of note, this is the first time that we see Xander actively killing a vampire.
Kill vampire.
Yeah, because he accidentally kills Jesse, but that's not intentional.
Mm-hmm.
Right. But this is the first time he's actually plunging a stake into a vampire to kill them.
This is Xander's credit sequence.
It is, yeah.
Because this ends up, that's the big poof.
Talking about the two sides of Xander here, it seems on an individual interpersonal level, he functions much better than he does within societal structures. It's he cares deeply about his friends and can be very thoughtful and caring. But when it comes to talking about anything like, the example here in this issue, homosexuality, is like he is just a slave to essentially the societal norms. And he can't seem to get out of that. I want to say trap, but that's not the right word. Whatever it is. But
I think
that structure.
You've brought up a really good point, because Xander, all these little speeches we've talked about have been one-on-one speeches without anybody around to put on societal pressure about how Xander should be acting as a man. It's just him he's so much better as a one-on-one person, which is, very true of a lot of people.
David, you may have made me love Xander again. What the fuck? Look at you. I didn't think it was possible. No, that's great.
Xander gets more problematic when there's another dude in the room. I think he has to feel, even if it's just Giles, he all of a sudden becomes performative. Because a lot of Xander's personality is performative. He's class clown man. He's like, so.
And of course he has to keep proving his masculinity.
We're getting close to the end of this episode, and it's Oz trying to lock himself up and Willow bursting into his house, and he's just so polite. He can't leave somebody knocking at the door, even if he's trying to lock himself up.
Just ignore it, Oz. Fuck.
Willow doesn't know how to shift between gears. It's low gear or high gear for her, you know what I mean?
She really is. And it's like, even if Oz were not a werewolf, if I were dating Willow and she just burst into my fucking house, I might be reconsidering staying with her, because it's like you're invading my house, and Oz doesn't need a reason to not go out that night. He can stay home and do nothing if he wants. You can tell I'm an introvert for being Oz could be on his own if he wants. Maybe he needs some time to recharge.
He did tell Willow he was busy. And from the introvert perspective, I understand that, but I don't think Willow understands that.
Willow's not an introvert, honestly.
No,
I mean, she's a more quiet, mousy, that's my quote fingers, person, but she's definitely gets energy from other guys. That's the only difference, introvert, extrovert.
Right. That's why I think
she
is ticked off that he said he was busy, but he's just sitting at home with some really scary looking chains.
She doesn't even give him a chance. He's at home. But how does she know that he's not busy at home doing something? She's literally been there for 2 seconds.
Willow, she only has, she's low or high. She's up and down, she's never sort of in between, which is a very teenage behavior. And I think Willow's the type of person that's I've rehearsed my speech, I wrote it down, and I rehearsed it, and by God, I have to say it.
Dude, I'm not going to let Willow skate by on her being a teenager, because she stays like that up until the time she's 22.
No, I can't, but no, she does stay like that the entire freaking time. And it is really rude, and I don't know. Honestly, here's my thing. I think Willow's romantic partners, are always better than Willow.
Yeah.
For me. But Oz and Tara are two of my very favorite characters on this show.
They're wonderful. And Willow's kind of dumb. She falls into the scary movie trap of, oh, there's something going on behind that couch. I'm going to slowly creep up to it.
Yeah.
Did anyone else? Okay, so I watched them back to back last night, and they're not completely similar, but that transformation is a direct homage to the transformation scene in American Werewolf in London.
Oh, okay. Well, yeah.
100. I mean, it's not nearly as gory, and it doesn't have the amazing Rick Baker visual amazingness, but it's very, because, it starts with the hand first. He sees his hand, and then, and even the pain noises that he makes, and the doubling over and the clutching, totally. Listeners, go and look at a clip on YouTube of the transformation in American Werewolf in London and look at the transformation.
Yeah. Well, I'm not sure it's even stopped yet, but for years, that scene in American Werewolf in London is basically the touchstone for every werewolf transformation scene
amazing.
in anything.
It's
right.
amazing.
It went from the
It's
Lon Chaney
amazing.
version to that in like from the 80s on, and yeah.
It's really such an. I mean, I'm not. That's not my favorite movie, but that transformation and makeup and if y'all haven't seen that out there, I highly recommend it just for the visuals and what Rick Baker does with the extraordinary, prosthetics and all that stuff. So I'm just a big fan of Rick Baker.
So I don't know, like for the rest of this episode, like for the rest of Oz being a werewolf, I don't have anything written down because this is it's running, it's shooting, it's
running, it's and the thing where Buff picked up Buffy, it's not well choreographed. It's a giant shoot, it's a lot of running. Yeah.
I mean, I do have one thing that annoys me, and it's probably just whatever writing. Shortly before this, we have Kane making silver bullets. I'm like, you're on a hunt. You've been on a hunt for like 3 days now. Why do you not already have these? We have not seen you fire a shot.
I think maybe Logan had a really good point about him being a serial killer. This is like part of his ritual where he needs to make silver bullets specifically, for that night's hunt. Because that's just his thing.
You don't know this, but he's not wearing any pants.
That's actually Tony Head in a cane
in a mask.
Neither's any of us, so yeah.
Oh, you know what? Yeah, I mean, how do y'all know that we're all wearing pants as we're sitting here?
Actually, as far as the podcasters know, we're just completely naked. So
true,
nude.
Truth.
Yeah. All nude podcasting.
It's an all nude podcast.
I'm sure our podcast inspires all kinds of fanfic that we don't want to know about.
Oh my god, that would be amazing! Someone write fanfic of our podcast.
Oh god.
Maybe keep it T-rated. Okay, that would be.
Yeah, that never works. Yeah. Just ask Channel Awesome. Like, I did have one question about the whole Oz is a werewolf thing. Why would Oz give up live prey to go after a big pile of meat? And it's not even like it was that big of a pile of meat. It just made no sense to me.
Kind of silly.
But yeah, no, there's running, and then there's wrestling, and then Willow shoots Oz. And
says, I shot Oz! And I wrote down, won't be the last time.
That's true.
It won't be the last time you shoot Oz. So.
And so we get into the very end of this episode. And unfortunately, the last bit of it, before the great end bit, we have a little more homophobia.
Yep. Yeah. Xander and his damn gay panic.
But I do have to say, Larry is entirely in love with Xander already. Like,
for sure.
As soon as that locker room
scene going on there.
He's into him.
Larry is totally into Xander,
Yeah.
Which is why I shipped them so hard, because it was so obvious after the locker room scene that it's like Larry's into Xander. And also, I think I really wanted Xander to be gay because it would have made him so much less problematic.
Ideally.
I'm not convinced.
Nope. And then Willow and Oz.
Oh, everybody's Lissa.
As problematic as this episode is, the scenes with Willow and Oz make this, and especially the end one, it makes it fucking worth it. Because this end scene's so beautiful.
It totally does.
Yeah.
I have written down, Oz is perfect, the most perfect. How many times can I type the word perfect? I think probably about 2 million times. And then I just wrote perfect, 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 perfect all over my notes.
Yeah, and it's sweet. And Willow is a lot better in this than she has. Like, I mean, I know I've been ragging on Willow a little bit in this, but she's really sweet and accepting. And that 3 days out of the month, I'm not much fun to be around.
3 days?
3 fucking days? Fuck you, Willow.
I know! 3 fucking days? Fuck you, Willow.
Yeah, I was kind of wondering about that. Like, is that
nearly 2 weeks out of the month for me back in the day? So yeah, no.
Yeah.
Fuck you, Willow.
I'm probably the wrong person to know about this. I wanted to ask: is that joke appropriate, inappropriate, or
whatever?
Somewhere in the middle?
I found it funny, except for the fact that like that's a really low amount of time. Like seriously.
Right? Yeah. No. I also did get that.
She's exaggerating.
She's making a point about.
Yeah.
You know,
I always thought that was like
I
thought it was sweet because it's like she's trying to find a way to say it's acceptable, it's okay. So
that's who you are. It's natural. Whatever.
Yeah.
I think it's sweet.
Yeah, I mean, I never have any problem with people mentioning periods on television because I think people should talk about that kind of stuff
a lot more. Yeah, I wouldn't liken lycanthropy to menstruation.
I
but
wouldn't. Right. I would not.
It's cute. It's a cute joke.
Yeah,
It's a cute
like,
joke.
They're hardly the first people who have done it. Like, I mean, people have called them like Werewolf Time before.
Oh, I like.
I always go with Shark Week.
Shark Week, yeah.
Yeah. Which is also a little more accurate to the length of time. So
I always used to. I always made Star Trek jokes because there was the Plot Tower, which is the blood fever, and like my friends and I, going back to the 70s, that's how we talked about it. Back in the 70s, when girls you couldn't say this out, in public. So it's like we were always on the Plot Tower.
But yeah, no, I really like the end of this episode and them bonding.
I do too.
Yeah.
It is a nice scene.
And the music is perfect, and it's really well framed, their first kiss.
Mm-hmm.
By the way, Allie's totally taller than Seth.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
An inch and a half, 2 inches.
Yeah, because, like, they're about, like, she's still a little bit taller than him, with his hair, like, all that spikiness. So it's like, Seth, like, come on. Like, I mean, I don't know, maybe she was wearing some heels or something, but yeah.
I also like the fact that she's, I mean, even with all the weirdness, she initiates the kiss, and it's really sweet, and again, it's really organic.
It's the scene from Innocence sets this up perfectly, because Oz says, in my fantasy, I'm not kissing you, you're kissing me. And it's a freeze frame. Like, everything stops.
And then the whole werewolf in love. And I'm like, oh. It just kills me every time.
Yeah.
Sorry for making those noises.
This episode has so many problematic things in it, and it is like it's not a very well crafted episode in terms of plot or special effects. But I will never skip this on a rewatch.
Yeah, I won't either.
The payoff is beautiful. You just watch it for them together, and the finally they're together. Yay!
No, I mean, like this is I mean, it's not in the top 10, it's not in the top 20, but this is for me, it's a quality episode just because of how I feel about it.
Again, I don't skip episodes with Oz that have major Oz plot lines or even really good Oz scenes.
Yeah.
I'm like, oh, Oz has a really great scene in this one. I love Seth Green I still really like Seth Green, but man, this time period, I was just like, I think I even went to see that stupid Idle Hands movie just because he was in it.
Oh, no.
Devin Saw is our Lord and Savior.
I saw a lot of movies with Seth Green in it.
Can't Hardly Wait, which is actually now a classic. But at the time, like 3 whole people saw in the theater.
I saw it in
I
theaters,
went and saw that. Yeah. I saw it in the theater because of Seth Green, for sure.
Someday I will show you my Vincent Kartheiser movie collection. Like, it's really... And he's been in some
he's made
stinkers.
Some really bad.
Oh God!
Sorry, no offense. He's made some bad movies.
No, believe me, I know. Yeah. Final thought for Bronze music, we did have "Blind for Now" by Lotion at the Bronze.
Yep.
And Lotion is actually one of the few is like a band. It's like, hey, I know who they are.
Yeah, me too.
Yeah, I was noticing like there were a lot of like Lotion posters in the background and stuff. I was like, oh wait, I've heard of them. I know who they are.
Tend to do that if they put up posters and stuff for whoever the band is, which makes sense. Clubs do that when whoever's playing.
There's always random Dingoes Ate My Babies posters up at the Bronze.
I think those posters were actually up before.
Before you actually saw them, they had Dingoes Ate My Baby posters.
They referenced it in the pilot, like the original pilot. They mentioned a band called Dingoes Ate My Baby. So Joss always had that idea, and he loved that name. And I guess it just took till season 2 to actually introduce them. So, nice world building. So, yeah, that's an okay episode.
Love the Oz stuff. I want to hit Xander. That's kind of every time I watch Buffy, I sort of think those two things. I love Oz. I want to.
It's one of those episodes where it's like there's a lot of bad stuff, but there's also a bunch of good stuff, and the good stuff is what's good is really good.
Yeah.
And although like I'd have to do the math to see how much bad stuff there is versus how much good stuff, but the good stuff is good, and it ties into the character arcs.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And so the good stuff manages to outweigh the bad stuff enough that it's something you can watch.
Yeah.
And not go, oh yeah, I'm going to skip this in a rewatch.
Yeah, no, I'd say like it's probably like 75-25 in favor of like bad versus good, but it's just the bad stuff is made up of feathers, while the good stuff is made up of like iron. So
Right.
Yeah, I mean, the bad stuff makes me want to like scream, but it's not like, oh my God, I can't watch this. I have to turn this off because I'm so offended. I'm so annoyed by it. But it was frustrating. I just yelled at Xander a lot on my TV. So
okay, Logan's losing her.
I thought you were going to say the bad stuff is feathers and the good stuff is chicken. And I was just like, you said iron. And it caught me so off guard. And I was like, the fuck? And then I realized you were doing you thought like you were making like a legitimate like scholarly reference. I was like, yeah.
No, I'm sorry. Can I steal that, Logan? Everything was like that. The bad part is feathers. The good part is chicken. Like that's just gonna be like a new saying that sweeps the nation.
I like it. Yeah, we should start using that now.
Okay.
Next time we'll be reviewing Bewitched, Bothered, and Bewildered. Until then, grr arg.
Grr arg.
Grr arg.
Grr arg.
Grr peacock.
We'd like to thank everyone who downloaded the podcast, and an extra special thanks to everyone who shared, liked, and subscribed on social media. If you'd like your questions or comments read on the show, you can contact us on our website, returntothehellmouth.com, on YouTube at Return to the Hellmouth, on Tumblr and Facebook at Return to the Hellmouth, on Twitter at HellmouthReturn, or on email at returntothehellmouth@gmail.com. We'll be sure to read your comments on the show. Be sure to rate our show at iTunes and Stitcher, and check out our show merchandise on TeePublic and Redbubble. See you on Tuesday for Bewitched, Bothered, and Bewildered.
Grr, arg.